Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today it's time for the host vlog for round 4 of Battle of the Booktubers. If you all haven't been following along, I will post a link of the playlist for round 4 down in the description below so you can catch up on all of the competitors' vlogs and figure out what's going on. If you don't know anything about Battle of the Booktubers, it is a competition I put together with 16 booktubers total, but in this round we have 4 booktubers who are competing to figure out which one of them gives the best recommendations. The 4 competitors this round I will also tag in the description down below so you guys can check out their channels. We have Sam from Sam Donovan, we have Jess from the Hex Library, we have Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl, and we have Krista from Books and Jams. So this is the start of round 4's host vlog, which means all of these lovely booktubers gave me a recommendation and I have to figure out what I think and give them a rating. We're going to start this vlog with the book Hounded, which I have had recommended to me so many times by subscribers, and so I was shocked that this actually got put into this competition because it gives me an excuse to read it finally. Not that I needed an excuse, but I went in blind. I knew nothing about this at the start. I knew that it had been recommended by a ton of people, so I knew it was fantasy, and that's pretty much it. I know it's the Iron Druid Chronicles, so I'm assuming that it has a druid involved. That was it. But it is a relatively short book, and this also has, like, the last little bit is 2 short stories that are about whatever is going on in this book, and so I'm just going to give you like percentages for the update until the end of like the regular story, and then depending on how everything goes, we might also just talk individually about the short stories at the end. So right now I'm about 41% of the way through. I am buddy reading this with Leandra. We wanted to read it together, and so I so far am enjoying certain parts and not enjoying others. To give you a general premise of the story, you are following a character who has several names, but I'm just going to call him Atticus because that's one of the names that he goes by. So Atticus is a druid, and Atticus is 2100 years old. So he has lived a life. He also has kind of an arch nemesis who is always after him and trying to find him, and so he has had to deal with this throughout the centuries, trying to evade this person's grasp. And the world is very fun. We have a lot of fantastical creatures. He is a druid, specifically an iron druid, and his powers come from the earth. And one of the first things that happens in this book is that he gets to fight some of the Fae. As an iron druid, the Fae do not like iron, and so he can use that to his benefit as well. You get to see him in fight sequences, and yeah, we're just trying to follow his storyline, figure out why, because we're kind of dropped into the middle of it. We don't really know why this person is hunting him. We don't know what he did in his past. It's a very goofy, silly satire of a story. It's not serious at all, and our character is very sarcastic and very not typical as far as like what you would imagine a druid being. He even talks about the fact that he looks like someone who is not a druid and presents himself as someone who is not very old because he is trying to hide his identity and kind of fit in this modern world. That's also another thing that comes into play here. You get to see someone who is very clearly from the older, like I think he says he's from the Iron Age, and he has had to learn to fit in with modern society. There are a whole bunch of gods and goddesses in this as well. You have some Norse gods, you have some Greek gods, you have Jesus Christ, you have Mary, everybody and anybody that you can imagine being in the realm of the gods is somehow involved in this world. And so it is very chaotic and very almost absurdist. To talk about what I'm thinking so far, I have things I love about this and things I don't love. So one of the things I have really appreciated is the world building. I like all of the gods and goddesses and how they have to interact, how they're tied to the places they originate from. And they can travel, but like how they interact with the world around them does depend and is dictated by where their origins are, which is very fascinating. I also like the incorporation of, with the gods and goddesses, we also have vampires and werewolves and ghosts and things like that. So it's very all-encompassing of the fantasy realm. I've enjoyed seeing how all of those characters and beings have to interact together in this world. One of my favorite characters in this so far has been the Morgan, which is a goddess of death in the shape of a crow. She can shapeshift though, but she's very creepy. I have really enjoyed how this author has written the gods and their nonchalance about life, about human life specifically. They're kind of playthings. They don't think in the same way that humans do because of the fact that they're immortal. And the goddess of death, the Morgan that we interact with in this, is very scary, but also kind of funny, and I've enjoyed her character a lot. One of the things I'm not really enjoying is kind of the absurdity factor, the tone of the story, the kind of humor that I think the author is going for. It sometimes rubs me the wrong way or takes me out of the story. I have found in the past that stories that are written this way, I have a hard time emotionally connecting to characters in the story because it's supposed to be funny, it's supposed to be satirical, and so I have a hard time taking it seriously, which I think is the point, but because of that, I feel distanced from the story, if that makes sense. The second thing that I am having trouble with, I don't quite know how to word it. This book is written in such a fashion, it reminds me of the way Discworld was, but in a little bit of a different way. So with Discworld, I told you guys whenever I did my review of that book, and I did it was the first book in Discworld, like the first published book in Discworld, because I know there's like 40 books. But when I went through that book, I think that book was a roller coaster road book, which means we go to different locations, like you're taken to different locations by the author, and you experience events, and then you move forward. And you go to your next location, you experience events, and you go to the next. So it's like a theme park, where you're not really in it, you're just there to observe. And that's kind of how I feel about this. This is a little different because in Discworld, that storyline is definitely not linear. It's more disjointed than this because you're dealing with a whole bunch of different characters, a whole bunch of different worlds or cities, whereas this is all in the same location with the same cast of characters, but it still very much feels like I'm pulling up in a roller coaster cart, watching a scene go by, and then I move to the next location. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. And once again, it distances me from the story. So right now, I think it's fine. It's an okay book, and I am enjoying certain facets. The world is very interesting. How they interact with all the gods is very interesting. So I am curious to see why the certain things have happened in the storyline, and the culminating event, which I'm assuming is going to be him meeting up with his arch nemesis and figuring out how that goes about and what exactly happens with those final moments. So we'll see. I am probably going to finish the book before I update you guys again, and then maybe I'll do a separate clip where I talk about the short stories at the end, because I think I want to rate the book based on the original story and then talk about the short stories after. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So the next time I talk to you guys, I will be finished with the book. So I'll see you in just a minute. I'm back, guys, and I had finished Hounded, and so I wanted to stop by and give you my final thoughts on this book. And my overall feelings are that I don't like it. I feel really bad because I really want to like it. I just don't. There are a lot of things about the book that I had trouble with. So I apologize to the booktuber who gave me this. I appreciate the recommendation, and I am glad that I checked it out, but I did not enjoy the story. So I'm going to talk first about the things that I did appreciate, and then things that I didn't like, and then I'll give you my final reading at the end. One of the things that I really did like about this book, and I understand why it's such a large series, is the world. The world building, the amount of gods and supernatural creatures and myths and really intricate like worlds, like miniature worlds within this world, I do think are fascinating. I really liked the intermixing of gods with monsters in a modern day society and figuring out how they would have to interact within a world where everyday humans don't know they exist. So that was very fun. However, to add on to that, I think that a lot of the worlds and gods and creatures that are thrown into this are just thrown in. And some of it, I think we're expected to understand certain lore, like we're supposed to recognize certain names. Some of it, I don't know if it's going to come up in later chapters and or not later chapters, but later books, and we're supposed to then get information about it. But I did feel like there were a lot of holes within the folklore and the religions, the gods that are brought up in this story. So while I did enjoy the world, and I really did like how chaotic and crazy, how many supernatural creatures and things can we cram into one storyline, I do think that because this story is so short, that a lot of it is underdeveloped. Another thing I really enjoyed about the story is the nature of the goddesses of death that you end up running across. I can't remember if I mentioned in the first clip that I had for you guys the Morrigan. So there are several goddesses of death that we run across in this series, but my favorite is the Morrigan, and I like how the author writes in the impact of immortality and godhood on someone's moral compass. The fact that someone doesn't understand the importance of time, the importance of life, things like that, just common occurrences such as wearing clothes, are an oddity for someone who lives outside of the mortal realm. And so I really did enjoy those impacts and the Morrigan, specifically that character, on the story. And lastly, the main character, Atticus, his connection, because of being a druid, his connection with the earth and his healing capabilities, and then some other powers that come to pass later on in the book. I really enjoyed learning about those. That's another thing I do wish was also more information forward, I guess. I feel like because I think that the magic system is interesting. However, I also think it's very convenient. I think that we learned about the magic as he was using it instead of learning about it and then later on finding a use for it, which I think a lot of authors do lean on because they don't want to info dump. And I appreciate that. I appreciate not having all of it front loaded, but I do think that you can interweave some of those things into the story, especially with some of the characters that were introduced in this. I think that we could have been shown the druid's power and potential for power before he needed to use them, in my personal opinion. I think it would have made the epic, like the battle scenes at the end and throughout when he is fighting, I think it would have made it more believable. And I think that it would have given the story a little bit more depth. So on to the things that I really did not like about this story. I think that first and foremost, because of how many creatures and things are involved in this world, there aren't characters that I really held on to. We have our two main characters. We have Atticus and we have his dog Oberon, and they are really the characters that you have the entire time. Most of the other characters are brand new, not only to us, but to Atticus. They are people who have come into his life at this point in time because of XYZ circumstances, and a lot of it is tied together in the overall plot, which I understand because of, once again, how short the book is, that we need to introduce characters that do push the plot forward. But I also want to see those characters that have been in his life forever, especially because he's 2,100 years old. So you can't tell me that this person doesn't have contacts and have deeper relationships with other people, because in this book, he really doesn't. The second thing I really don't like is the fact that there isn't a lot of contrast within the character relation or the character personalities. And what I mean by that is the two main characters that you get to see the most of, so Atticus and his dog Oberon, are both very sassy and childlike and sarcastic. I would have preferred if one of them was a grumpy asshole. Like, if Atticus, which I think this would have made sense, if Atticus, being 2100 years old, is tired of everyone's crap and wants to, you know, lock himself away from the world, not be involved in the world, and then his dog Oberon is this sassy, sarcastic, goofy person or goofy entity, I think they would have played off each other better. Whereas since they're both sarcastic, they're both goofy, they both don't take anything seriously, it's just a lot of the same thing over and over again. And I saw that same attitude in so many of the characters in this book. They're very flippant, and it makes it hard for me to care about what's happening in the storyline when no one else seems to. And then the last thing I'll say as far as the reasons for me not liking this storyline is the inconsistencies within some of the plot. And I think that this was bound to happen because of how chaotic and how many things were thrown at us throughout this story. We have so many gods and goddesses and supernatural creatures that I think things were bound to get forgotten about. And I can't give you a ton of information as to the exact moments that I'm talking about, but at the end, I will tell you that the culminating events that happen in this book, the last battle scene, there were a lot of things that I didn't understand why they went down the way that they did. The plot seemed very convoluted. We were trying to connect so many dots and put so many obstacles in the way and make things difficult for the character and their plight that there should have been other answers to certain questions. There also should have been answers to certain questions that we didn't get answers to. So yeah, I think the end was very, it had a lot of holes in it for me that I feel like could have been answered with other beings and things that had been introduced in the book that we know certain characteristics about, that those characteristics were not used in a way that they should have been, or they were forgotten about entirely and we had to overcome an obstacle without them because they weren't involved in the final scene. One last thing that I do want to mention, and I know I said the last one was the last, but this just popped into my head and it is a significant reason for my rating for this, and it is the over-sexualization throughout this entire book in various characters. So our, like for instance, the Morgan Crow that I really liked. There are certain scenes in this where she becomes so horny, it really inopportune moments, and it doesn't make sense for her attitude and what was happening in the scene. It didn't fit. There also was a couple of scenes with Oberon, the dog, where all he can think about is some French poodles, and some things happen with that as well. There also is a couple of scenes, or there are a couple of scenes that other characters have, like they mention like certain beef, like they mention certain people are beefcakes, or they will talk about like the voluptuousness of someone, that, and those are descriptors that I wouldn't mind if it wasn't everywhere else in the book as well. So I feel like I couldn't get through an entire chapter in this without sex being mentioned. There were entire scenes that happened in bed where I was like, I don't know, why is this in bed? Like, why are we here? Why is this happening? And I think part of that is because the characters weren't developed too. And so I did just feel like I don't know these characters, and all of a sudden we're in bed with them, and now what are we doing? That part I really didn't enjoy as well. So with all of that, my rating for this is going to be a 1.5 star. I am going to give it the 1.5 because I really did enjoy the concept, the world, and a lot of the creatures that were thrown into this book. I think I absolutely could have loved if some of the other things didn't make me mad or pull me out of the story. And not allow me to connect with the characters. Unfortunately, this was a miss for me. But anyway, on to the next book. I have started my second book for this vlog, and that is Hood by Stephen Lawhead, I think is the author's name. The only thing I knew going into this book is that it was a Robin Hood retelling. So that's where I started. And I am currently at 54%, so around halfway through the book. And I wanted to stop in and give you guys my thoughts. So far, I just think it's okay. Currently, it's in the 3-star range. I am a little disappointed that it's not more creative with the story of Robin Hood. It seems to be very close to what I remember about Robin Hood. I'm by no means an expert. I've watched Robin Hood Men in Tights many, many times, and I loved was it a Disney rendition where the fox was Robin Hood? I've watched that a lot too as a kid. But so that's my experience with Robin Hood. And so far, a lot of the main plot points are the same, which is fine for a retelling. I just think that it's a little predictable because of that. But in remaining true to the original story, it is set in like old-timey England. Specifically, in this case, our main character is Welsh. And we have some English characters, some French characters. There's definitely like a war going on, land being taken over, people being treated poorly. So, Robin Hood. And one of the things that I have not enjoyed about this book, and I do think it's very true to the times, is how women are treated and how women are seen in those times. So specifically in the second chapter, the main character, Bran, is, and you know this going in because the first chapter talks about how he is a womanizer, but in the second chapter you get to see him talking with the maid Marian, and he is essentially at the end of the chapter, he brags to the reader about how he will get into her bed by the end of the summer. Like, that's his goal. And we already know that he is known as someone who steals women's virtue, because that's what his father had talked about in the first chapter. And while I understand that is something, so at the very beginning of the book, I will say that I was giving the book, the narrative, the benefit of the doubt, thinking that maybe this is going to be a learning opportunity for him. Like, he will eventually get to the point where he realizes that this behavior was something that he shouldn't do. And I do still think there's hope for that. But at 50% of the way through, I am still not loving Bran. Not just for that, but he is the definition of a spoiled brat, of a spoiled prince. It's that trope. And while I do enjoy seeing a massive character arc from characters that start out that way, I haven't seen a massive character arc so far, and it's the 50% mark. So I kind of expected more growth from him, more changes, and we have gotten to see like bits and pieces of him growing up a little bit and doing the right thing for people who can't fight for themselves. But I haven't seen enough. So we're gonna have to like really turn the tables for me to enjoy Bran's character in this book, because so far I just think he's kind of a pretentious butthole, and I'm not loving that. I have enjoyed the little Easter eggs from Robin Hood that we're getting. So the Friar Tuck reference, a Little John reference, Maid Marian, like there are all these things that I do appreciate popping up, and I am happy to see these characters again. But like I said, I do think I would like a little bit of a fresh spin on the story. And maybe that's just me. So I don't think that's any fault of the book. I think that some people who read retellings and some people who really love retellings are wanting, like, I don't want to say an exact story because that's not what this is, but like a story that's very, very true to the original retelling. And I think I like that sometimes, but for whatever reason, this one's not working as well for me as some other retellings. Maybe it's because I've seen like the movie, I watched the movie so many times, but I don't know. I don't know why this one just feels different to me. In the beginning of the book, I was a little confused as to the characters. There are a lot of kingdoms, like kingdom names that are thrown around, and barons' names, and kings, and people within like these kingdoms throughout this country. And so I was a little confused. I'm more solidified on that now. So I do think that the author they throw a lot at you at the very beginning, and then they kind of iron out the wrinkles as we go along in the story. So I have liked that. I would appreciate a map, because I'm reading this on audio, but I did try a sample on Kindle to see if there was like a map in the beginning so I could see the kingdom, and there was not one, at least in the Kindle edition. So that was a little disappointing, but that's just me being extra. There is a character that I'm really interested in right now, and I don't think she's going to be in the story long. There aren't a lot of female characters that we follow, so maybe that's why I'm connecting with this one so much. But one of the female characters that pops up in the book around 50% of the way through ends up being kind of like a healer, and you get to watch her as kind of like an eccentric person, like someone who's definitely doesn't fit the norm and is kind of like out in the boondocks somewhere just doing her thing. I really have enjoyed her in the story, and I think we'll see, fingers crossed, she might be the catalyst to change Bran's, like to start his upward trajectory in his character arc. I'm hoping. So due to all of those things, right now, like I said, I'm just feeling 3-star range. It definitely has the opportunity to increase its score or increase its rating depending on what the characters do, the character arcs, maybe how much action, how much connection I have with characters in the second half. Because so far I'm just feeling that it's very similar to the original story, which I dearly love, but I would rather watch the original or read the original, if that makes sense. So fingers crossed that the book surprises me in the second half. I have finished Hood, and guys, this one wasn't a win for me. This vlog isn't going well. I'm so sorry, guys. I think that the main reason this book didn't work for me is because it's not a creative retelling. I talked about this a little bit in the first clip, and I was not very confident when I was talking in that first clip about how much I really understood about Robin Hood, and like how it's not like I'm a stan for Robin Hood. I don't have a lot of experience other than the Robin Hood Men in Tights and the like Disney rendition with the fox as Robin Hood. But after listening to this, at the very end of this book, the author actually goes through the history of Robin Hood and the things that this author has changed. Because I was thinking, like, am I bored because I know all of these details, or am I bored because of something else? And I was doubting whether or not I actually knew what the story was, and maybe I was just making predictions, and the predictions ended up being right. But no, they were actually like plot points in the original Robin Hood. And when the author talked about it, I was like, okay, so I did know the story, and he decided not to change the story. The things that, I mean, there were obviously small changes made, but he talks about like the main choices that he made, the main changes that he made were to make Robin Welsh and to put him in the 1100s, I think is what they said. And so the time frame and the location of Robin Hood were really the main components that was changed in this. We had some other things that aren't always decided upon, him being noble, him, like some of the family facets that he had, the experience that he has getting to be who he is as Robin Hood in this book, I'm sure are all differing from the original stories, but not enough so that I couldn't easily predict where the narrative was going. If I can predict the story, I really need the characters to be someone that I love and that I want to dive into, that I want to spend time with them doing the mundane tasks or the non-mundane tasks that they're going to do in the storyline. Because if I know where they're going, what else am I reading the book for? And I really didn't like any of the characters in this book, with maybe the exception of Ewan, who is like the Little John character. And you don't get to see him that often. And so the one character I kind of enjoyed wasn't really on page. I hated the Robin Hood character in this. He was a pretentious butthole, and I know it's a series, and I can see where the author's going as far as his growth with caring for his people and not just caring for himself. I can see him getting there. But by the end of this book, there was a breaking point where I don't want to give anything away if you guys don't know the story of Robin Hood, but like there is a breaking point where he is super selfish and wants to just protect himself, and then making the decision to help his people out. There is that choice that is made, but we don't get to see it. That part's skipped. Like there's a little bit of a time jump that happens whenever that particular part of the story happens. And so we don't even get to see the growth. And then even through the growth, and when we have him helping his people and doing the things that he needs to do to protect his kingdom, he still has these like moments that I'm like, I really don't like you. You're not a likable character. And I want Robin Hood to be likable, I guess. There was a scene at the very end of the book where, and I won't, do I want to say who? He ends up striking someone. I won't say who. And it really made me mad because he was frustrated with what was being said. And he has every right to be frustrated because he has been pushed down in the dirt over and over and over again. And people are very unfair in this storyline. And I do think the author wrote that very well with the predicament that the people in this kingdom are for. And so he is very frustrated. But instead of like after he strikes the person realizing like that was an act that I shouldn't have done, like I'm acting out of frustration and I shouldn't be doing this, he just responds like, because the person is like, don't do that again. And he's like, don't give me cause to. And I'm like, really? That's the Robin Hood that we want? Like I don't know, guys. I just did not enjoy this story. I thought that some of the storyline was fun, but most of it, I would rather be reading the original. My overall rating for this is going to be a 2.25. I don't think it deserves a 1 star because I do think it's very true to the original Robin Hood retelling. And so if you like Robin Hood retellings that are true and that don't stray from the path, then I think that you would really enjoy this. I just wanted a little bit more. And I wanted to like the characters, which I really didn't, but that could have been just me. Maybe it was my perception of, what was happening with the Robin Hood character, and maybe I missed something, but I'm really sorry to whoever recommended me this book. I really wanted to love it. I love the original Robin Hood, but I don't know, this one didn't hit for me. Back with my next book. So the next book I will be picking up for this vlog is The Rage of Dragons. This book has been on my TBR for a long time, and it is one that I've been hesitant to pick up because of the war components. I am currently 20% in, or almost 20% in. I'm 100 pages into the book. And I will tell you that originally I knew that it was about war and it had dragons and it had something to do with gender, but I wasn't exactly sure what specifically dealing with gender and like the magic system was happening. I had read the synopsis of this a long time ago when I originally put it on my TBR, but once again, because of the war elements, I have kind of shied away from it. And at 20%, I can say that I am pleasantly surprised. It does have a lot of war in it so far. That's pretty much all we've seen. We've had a couple of scenes where there's like peace times or whatever, but the majority of the book has been fighting and conflict and things like that. So, but I do think it's written in such a way that I don't feel like I feel like I'm still learning something about the characters. One of the things I don't like about war scenarios is if the main piece of the storyline is about strategy. If all I'm trying to figure out is the strategy of the characters and the intentions of the leaders for their men, I get a little bored and stop caring. Whereas I feel like in these battle scenes, you learn about the characters, like intricacies of the characters, and you also get to learn more about the magic systems too. I do think that this is very immersive with the magic systems. Not everything is described to you. It doesn't feel info dumpy at all, which I appreciate. And so at the very beginning of this story, you have a prologue that is talking about something that happened, I think, 150 years ago, which was this community of people called the Chosen had escaped from somewhere. I still don't know where or why they escaped, but they came to an island that happened to be inhabited by other people, and they were in a battle. The Chosen have people who are called gifted, and then that's where the gender comes into play. There are gifted women who can, it seems like, supply the men with the power to become enraged. And so there are certain men who have this ability to connect with a gifted woman, and the men become like these huge kind of berserker type people who can fight hundreds of people in the place of one. And then the women who are gifted are very rare. I don't remember the proportion or the percentage of women who are born gifted. But then there's even less of a percentage, I believe, of women who can call dragons. We still haven't learned that yet, learned like the percentage of the ones who can call dragons. But women do seem to be able to call dragons to their will and use them in battle. So we are following the character of Tao, I think is how you pronounce his name, and he is becoming a man. So he is kind of right at that age. He's training. His father is a leader in the lesser army. So there are castes in this system, and his father is like at the top of the lesser tier. And you also learn that the castes are given based on the birth mother, which I find interesting. So all of this, the gender roles in this have been reversed as far as like strength and power. I think it has really been focused on the women. Even though the men in this can get enraged, they still have to have the women to give them the power to do that, which I have found intriguing. But anyway, so Tao is learning to fight. There is still these wars happening with the people 150 years ago. These tribes that they were battling whenever they escaped to this island are still battling with the Chosen. And you also know they're called the Houdini, I think is what they're called. And the Houdini also have gifts that they're using against the Chosen. And so it seems that this battle has been raging for 150 years. There still is no peace. And Tao is also connected to Jabari, who is a character who is a noble. He's a petty noble. So in the noble class, there's also castes. And he is training to become one of the warriors who can become enraged, I think, or like someone who would help protect that person. So yeah, lots of political things within the military that we're learning as well. The dragons are interesting, but they're definitely not the focus. The people, the gender, the power dynamics are definitely more the focus, but I don't mind. I think that it's been intriguing so far. We do have Tao existing in a land where a person of privilege, the person who is like in charge of the realm, the firstborn son of a specific woman, is kind of an ass. And so having to deal with that and protect essentially how he deals with seeing injustices done within his hometown, and how his dad deals with it, how the people around him deal with it, is what we've seen so far. So far so good. I am going to get back to it, and I will probably update you guys. I'm thinking maybe around 60%, and then I'll do an update at the end, but I'll see you when I see ya. I am 80% of the way through Rage of Dragons, and so I wanted to give you guys another update. I am still really enjoying this book. I am surprised by several elements, pleasantly surprised by several elements. One, This is very much a war story and very much ingrained in the fight scenes. So if you're not a person who enjoys watching fight scenes and having it played out in front of you, this is probably not the book for you. And I wouldn't have said that I was that type of reader prior to reading this book. I think that I've enjoyed certain stories that have fight scenes in them, but they're definitely not the primary source of storytelling. And this book definitely is. I would say this takes the cake for any of the books that I've read that have fight scenes in them. I think this is the most aggressive. And I will say, I think that it might be because of the fact that it's a revenge story and you have these emotions going on. I also really like the fact that we have almost this band of brothers that has come together. I don't know how much I want to tell you guys and how much I really told you at the first. I think I updated you at 20%. But the main character does end up getting into a kind of military school is not the right word, but school is the best thing I have for it. It's a sect of the military that he is being trained for, and within this, he has what he calls his sword brothers, the people that he is training with day in and day out. They are the people that he is building kind of a team with in order to fulfill these competitions that happen within the military as well. So if you are a fan of competitions, that is something that this book has in it too. And the camaraderie and how these men see one another, how even in his anguish and his despair, there's a moment in time where one of his sword brothers and him fight, and like within like a skirmish or whatever for the day, and it gets a little rough. And the conversation that those two individuals have after the fight about these kind of inner demons inside of them is really insightful, and I really appreciated that. I also like this book because people die, which I know is a really weird thing to say, but I, in probably the past year, have realized how predictable books have gotten, even some of my favorite authors, where the resurrection trope is something that prevails because no one wants to see their favorite characters die. But I like it when authors take the risk of taking someone out of the picture that you didn't expect, or someone who was very impactful to a story. And whether or not they are used as a catalyst to further the plot, I don't know that I mind, as long as it's done tastefully. And I think that both of those are done in this. There are certain characters that are used as, I don't want to call them a plot device because I feel like that cheapens the sacrifice of the character, but it does develop the characters around them and pushes the plot forward at the same time. You also have other characters, though, whose deaths are not quite as... it feels bad saying that they're not quite as meaningful to the story, but they kind of are a little blip in time, but you still have these sacrifices and these desperate moments with these characters that I have really liked seeing. The magic system is also really intriguing. I've liked how we've gotten a little peek into some of the gifted people in this realm. Not too much, because we are kind of on the outskirts, being in Tao's head as a lesser, but we do get to see bits and pieces of other characters and throughout like battle scenes and things like that, which I have appreciated. I also like their, I'm not going to pronounce it right, but I think it's Izihogo, which is almost the land of the dead, or the land where demons preside. And we've seen a lot of that within the last, I guess, 60% since I've talked to you. And it's really intriguing, the lore behind it also, and how that connects to their gods is really interesting. So I've appreciated that. There are a few elements that I think are a little shaky for me as far as why certain things are the way that they are, but I know that this is a series, and so I'm thinking that some of that will be explained later, although I don't think the series has been continued. But there's something specific about the dragons that we learned, and the actions of these nobles to have the dragons kind of at their beck and call. And that's kind of all I'll say about that. There's some pieces of that I don't quite understand. There also is one character that I am a little disappointed in how they are or they have been used at this point in time. There was one chapter that I just recently read that takes this character who is supposed to be at least you receive hints that this person might not be as bad as Tao thinks them to be, and you get to be in their head for a little bit and hear kind of their reasoning, which I really appreciated that part of the storyline. I thought that it was really engaging, really interesting to see someone else's perspective and why certain events had to happen, had to play out the way that they were. But in a scene directly after that, we have this character acting almost in an enraged way, and it was just very disappointing, which is probably the point, to show that characters all have flaws and nobody is going to stand above the rest in nobility and dignity. They're probably all, in the muck with the rest of them. But I just was a little disappointed to see that character do what it is he does. So anyway, I am enjoying this right now. As far as like my predictions go, it's probably going to be in the 4-star range somewhere, unless the ending is just absolutely horrendous, or if the ending is just absolutely phenomenal. I suppose it could potentially be a 5-star. I'm not getting 5-star vibes throughout the entire story though, so probably not, but it could be high 4-star. I have really enjoyed my time, and I am kind of sad that the series isn't continued, because I think this was originally published in 2017, and I don't think the series has been continued since then, which is a little concerning. So whoever recommended me this, I hope that you have insight that this series is actually going to be continued. I hope I didn't just start a series that I want to know the ending of and I'm never going to get it. But anyway, I have about 100 pages until the end, and I will see you guys when I get there. I am back. I have finished Rage of Dragons. I unfortunately don't have a physical copy to hold up anymore because I did have to return it back to the library, but I did get my pages read, and I can't tell you much about the plot because obviously it's like the last 20% of the book I need to talk to you guys about. I will say that the pacing of this book is absolutely insane. It felt like, even though this was a 520 something page book, it felt like I was racing the entire time. There wasn't really any lulls, and maybe in the slight moments where there were some really intimate moments with the characters, and so it didn't really feel like a lull. I'm very, very impressed with that aspect. I'm also impressed that I'm not tired of it. A lot of war books where we have battle scene upon battle scene upon battle scene, I get tired. I get annoyed with having the same thing repeated to me over and over again, and this author was creative enough with the scenes, detailed enough that I felt immersed in the read, and the stakes were high. Do not go into this book thinking that no one's going to die, because people will. And they're not necessarily people that you think are going to. So I'm impressed with that. I do like a good desperate push to the end, I guess. And the ending of this book definitely, it holds a lot in its hands for the future of the series. I do think the second book in the series is out, but maybe not the third. I'll put it up on the screen if I'm wrong, but I'm excited to continue the series. I really liked this. There were still a few items that I found unbelievable or unexplained. There were just a few things that I was like, I don't really believe that would be how this person would handle it because of XYZ consequence. And then there were a couple of things with the dragons specifically that I wish would have been explained further. So yeah, I do like what happened with, how do I want to say that, with the royalty at the end and the revenge story just in general with Tao, and how like where he is at the end of the book, I really appreciate. Overall, my rating for this book is going to be a 4.25. I am really excited to add this to another series that I'm going to be continuing, and I I am impressed. I will be looking out for this author in the future. I also need to intro the next book because I am already 30% of the way in, and this is the last book of season 1, Battle of the Booktubers. I mean, other than the championship round, but like of the regular round, this is the last book. I'm so excited. And that is 11/22/63. Honestly, the only thing I knew about this book going into it is that it's about the JFK assassination. I didn't know anything else other than obviously it's a Stephen King book. So I was a little concerned, hesitant. I have wanted to read more by Stephen King, but I just haven't gotten up the nerve to do it. The only Stephen King I've ever read is Fairy Tale, and I have been told numerous times that that is not his traditional work because that is a fantasy horror. It's a portal fantasy specifically. And so a lot of people were like, this is not, like, if you liked Fairy Tale, you might not enjoy King. And so I was a little nervous. And so this competition, once again, kicked me in the butt, making me read things that I do want to read but have just been hesitant about. And I have to tell you that I am pleasantly surprised so far. I tell you that I'm 30% of the way in, which you may think is a long time or like a long way into the book. However, this is a 31-hour audio. I've read 9 hours and I'm only 30% of the way in. I like chunky books. And so I was excited about the fact that this was chunky, but I was also a little hesitant because of the things that I've already talked about, but also because this is historical. It is deemed as horror on Goodreads, but I don't know that I get that vibe from it in my personal opinion. But if you haven't heard of this book, you follow our main character, Jake, who is a teacher, and he is given the opportunity by someone in his life. His name's Al. He's the owner of a pub, a hamburger joint, essentially. And he's given this opportunity to go back in time to 1958. And there's like a little portal within this person's restaurant that will go back in time. And there's all these rules that are given. And I've been so impressed with how engaged I am in a story when there's nothing fancy going on. Like, this isn't a fantasy book. 31-hour audiobooks for me, if it's going to be a chunky read, it probably is going to be fantasy, and it's going to have something that has to be built upon, a world that has to be discovered, and kind of we have to get into the nitty-gritty. But this book is in our world. It's just gone back in time. However, I will say that King does a really good job of making it feel surreal and making it reminding you of the nostalgia that you've never had. I was not alive in 1958, but like just these little descriptions. The first scene when he goes back in time is, I don't remember exactly where he goes, but he gets a root beer. And he describes the flavor of root beer back then. He also, at some point in time, is talking about how they deliver milk to your door and the differences in the taste of milk then versus today. And I just, it's also not all pleasant, which I have appreciated. He talks about the smog in the air, the smell of smoke everywhere you go because people are allowed to smoke indoors, and it's just, that's an everyday occurrence in the world in 1958 as everyone was smoking. And the factories and mills and everything that were just spewing pollution into the air, he talks about like how it stinks, like it smells like and feels like you're walking through a smog. And so it's not all pleasant. And I appreciated the contrast of that. So he says in one specific moment that the past stinks, but it tastes delicious. And he talks about all the differences in the two timelines, but it's also about like how people talk back then and him having to acclimate to what does he call it? The geographical language. They have a different slang that's essentially used, and he has to acclimate himself to that. There's also like the case that there's, no technology, and there's the money is different there. And so like all these different things that he has to tackle. And then on top of that, there is this magic that is explained and how it is incorporated into the here and the now, like the present timeline, which in this book is 2011. And I've really appreciated that aspect as well. One of the things that you learn very early on is that when you go back in time and come back, only 2 minutes have passed. It doesn't matter how long you're there. You can be there for years. You can be there for a couple of seconds. When you come back, it's been 2 minutes. And so that has some specific ramifications for people, especially if you go back for a long time, because you could disappear, be gone for years, and come back and everyone thinks that it's the same day. Also, there is the component where every time you go back in time, it's the first time. So everything is reset. So whatever you do, it sticks until someone goes back in time again, and then it resets. So I don't know, I'm really enjoying myself so far. It is 30%, and I am a little worried that the momentum, the engagement that I'm seeing in the storyline is going to falter at some point in time with so long of a story. But so far, I'm not bored at all. I'm fascinated. I like our character, Jake. I like there's a story that he tells you at the very beginning of, he's a teacher, he's an English teacher, and he also helps with GED classes, and one of his students who is struggling to get a GED, who's an older man, I think he was in his 60s when he's getting his GED, and you can tell that he has some type of mental deficiency, but you're not exactly sure. But when he reads through this man's essay that he turns in, it's about how his father murdered his family and his mother when he was very young and ended up hurting him, which is why he has the deficiencies that he does. And it was so impactful and has impacts further on down the line in the story. I am weirdly enamored with this book. So I'm going to continue on. I probably won't see you for a couple of days because this book is taking me a while to get through, but I do only have the audio for 4 more days. So I have to finish it within the next week. So not too long, but I'll see you when I see you. I'm back and I finished 11/22/63. I apologize for not coming back and updating you guys throughout the book, but I got a little nervous because as I talked to you last time, I had 4 days left on Libby and it's a 31-hour audiobook. I got busy and couldn't actually read it for the first 2 days after I talked to you. And so I had it for like 1.5 more days. And I essentially just sat on my couch for an entire day and listened to this audio to make sure that I got it, because there's a huge waiting list for this. And so anyway, I have finished it. So now I'm going to talk to you about my final thoughts. I think it's actually fitting because I don't know that there would have been much else that I can share with you that's about the plot. So yeah, I think that it'll be fine. You're not going to miss anything from not getting that second update. But I will start with talking about the things that I think could have made this book better. I personally think that this book should not be this long. I think that a lot of the things that we cover in the past timeline, or not even the past timeline, but just in the past, when Jake goes back into the past and lives his life to try and save JFK, I think that there's a lot of time that passes and character development that goes on there, and some of it could have been clipped. I do think that some of it was very important for what happens at the end. And so I'm not saying all of it should be clipped. I'm not saying this should be a short book by any means, because I do think that King took his time developing a specific set of characters. And I understand the other scenarios and how they were important because they weaved in the history behind some of what was happening before the JFK assassination, like what was happening in history at that point in time. But there were definitely lulls in the storyline where I could feel myself like, okay, can we move on? Can we go a little bit quicker, please? Because of just how long the storyline was. I am very impressed with the character development and how much I cared about this really simplistic storyline of this man who travels back in time and sets up a life because he has to, and he has time to kill before, this event happens. And so I did really enjoy that. There was something at the very end of the storyline that is brought up, and obviously I can't tell you what it is, but that adds a new layer to what was happening. And I think that was rushed. So I'm a little conflicted with how long the book is and what pieces I thought were valuable, interesting, and then some other pieces just seemed to be brushed under the rug. I think that whole ending piece, the extra, I don't know, like trip at the end of the finish line, if you want to say that, I think that could have been cut out of the story, and I understand it wouldn't have been able to end the same way, but yeah, I don't know. I think I would have liked either more development with what happens at the very end, or just cut it in general and end the story a different way. I did like the ending, the kind of bittersweetness, the realism, even though this is obviously a fictional story. I did like that. I also enjoyed King's back and forth on the past and not glorifying the past. I really appreciated, there were a couple of scenes that he put in, and he didn't do it all of the time. It was not a big part of the book, but there were certain instances where our character, who is back in 1958, 1960s, that he stops and talks to you, the reader, and is saying, just in case I've given you the wrong perception, that I've told you that this is a time without reproach, and it's this amazing thing that we've gotten away from and that we'll never get back to. And like, if I have glorified this time frame for you, let me adjust the lens and show you how it could be a horrible time as well. There was a scene that was showing segregation, and I won't go into the details of what specifically was shown in the book, but it was a very detailed and simple thing that was just norm in that time frame, that definitely it views the readers, I mean, it colors the lens, right? To show you that it's not all good. It's not all it's trumped up to be or whatever. And so I did appreciate King doing that multiple times throughout the storyline to just, refocus. Like, I am telling you all of these things. There are a whole bunch of things about the future or about the past that we can be nostalgic about and we can miss, and that's valid. But we also have to understand that these things that happened in the past, we have grown from. So the future isn't all bad type of a conversation, which I did like. I will also say that the story impressed me in a way because I am not a historical fiction reader. I find myself getting very bored in like slice of life moments where we're just living through very important historical pieces of information and events that have happened, things that have changed our future. It's just not my type of reading. And there were very few moments that I was bored in this. There were a few lulls that, like I said, could have been sped up or cut out, but for the most part, this book was very enjoyable. So with all of that said, my overall rating for this book is going to be a 4.25. I think I want to read more by King. I am still a little hesitant because I know that I've read Fairy Tale, which I liked, but people told me that's not his normal writing. And then 11/22/63, this is not what I would consider horror. And so I still have not read like a Stephen King straight horror novel, and I don't really know where to start. So if you guys have suggestions for where to go with King's writing from here, if I've liked the Fairy Tale and I've liked 11/22/63, let me know what you think I should start with next. But because of the fact that this is the last book for Battle of the Booktubers, round 4, I mean, this is crazy. I've been reading for this project since, I think, March. And I just finished the last book. This is insane. This is intense. But I need to recap this vlog for you so you know like what all my predictions were and what my ratings were. So the first book that I read in this vlog, I'm pretty sure was Hounded, and I rated Hounded 1.5 stars, and I'm pretty sure this was a recommendation by Jess. The second book I read was Hood, which I rated a 2.25 stars, and I'm pretty sure Krista is the one who recommended me this. The third book that I read was Rage of Dragons, and I rated it 4.25 stars, and I think that recommendation came from Sam. And then the 11/22/63, I rated it a 4.25 stars, and I'm pretty sure this recommendation came from Jolene. So those are my predictions and my ratings for this entire vlog. This has been such an amazing process. I have absolutely loved Battle of Booktubers. I've loved every single round, and I can't thank the participants enough for putting up with my shenanigans and participating in this really amazing experience. Don't forget to watch all of the competitors' vlogs and come for the live show. I will have all of the information that you need in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.